Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Human Behavior Podcast. For this episode, we're defining a term that you've likely heard before called complacency. We've all heard the saying that complacency kills, or had someone tells us not to get complacent, but I don't ever hear anyone defining what complacency actually is. So for this episode, we're defining complacency using 4 powerful cognitive processes that affect all humans, which are adaptation, change blindness, channel capacity, and sequencing. During the episode, we define each one of these elements that make up complacency, and we talk about why complacency exists, how it affects us, when it affects us. We give some very simple ways to help counteract the brain's natural tendency towards complacency. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want more, you can check out our Patreon channel where we have a lot more content as well as subscriber-only episodes of the show. Enjoy the podcast. I would kindly ask that you leave us a review, and more importantly, please share it with a friend. Thank you for your time, and don't forget that training changes behavior. All right, and we've started. Good morning, Greg, and hello to everyone tuning in to this week's episode of the Human Behavior Podcast. We appreciate you all for listening and for sharing it with your friends. So we've had a busy couple weeks, been on the road a little bit. We did a subscriber-only podcast. If you're on our Patreon, you can check that out. Or if you want to, when we were down in St. Louis, it was a great one. It was in a nice studio, and we had some great folks on there too to talk about a bunch of training and a bunch of other different issues. But today, the topic we're going to be talking about is complacency, and it's you always hear people say complacency kills, or don't get complacent, or but no one really ever defines it. I know we do, right. but I until other than us, I've never really heard someone actually explain the process of what complacency is. And it's often talked about as this is something that you can fall victim to if you're not careful. When in fact, I would say complacency is something that is part of the normal function of your brain. This is how we're wired to be complacent in a sense. And so, you hear all the different sayings, the complacency kills. It's like, well, I don't know if that's the best way to talk about it. So I'm going to throw to you, Greg, to kind of start this discussion off, but I definitely want to get into, for you guys listening, kind of what is complacency, what makes it up, why does this exist? Can I counteract this stuff? So I think we should probably start with, if you want to give some definition or overarching explanation of what complacency actually is, and then we can kind of jump into it from there.
I'll give you both. So complacency is overconfidence or self-satisfaction accompanied by unawareness. So that means that your homeostasis is such that you can miss actual dangers, whether structural or personal deficiencies lead to those dangers. And the easy way to remember that is you're doing just enough to get by, and you're stopping at the line rather than crossing it. And that gives you a feeling of calm satisfaction with the situation, your abilities, and you don't try harder. And that failure to get anything done can impact your survival. So the easiest way that I try to sit down with somebody and explain to them is a haircut. Okay, if your hair is growing and you're not bald, of course. So imagine a person with a haircut. If you allow the haircut to grow, sooner or later it's going to get in your eyes. You're going to have to keep wiping it out of your eyes with calorie. It's going to cover your ears. You're not going to be able to hear. Then sooner or later, if the sweat gets on it, it's stuck to your eye. Now I can't see clearly in the rain when I'm running, and I trip over the garden gnome. Okay, same thing with the mani-pedi. All of a sudden I get like, what's the guy with the huge helicopter, Howard Hughes, the huge airplane, and my nails start curling around, and now I can't type help, to the hotel staff.
What was that
exactly.
Episode,
goose. It was a goose, not a moose. The flying one goose, the ground one moose. But the idea is that look, this all hinges on entropy. Entropy is physics, and it affects everyone and everything. And in any closed system, uncertainty and disorder always increase. So when you fail when you're comfortable in yourself at a point in time, and you're not trying to grow, and you're not taking on new challenges, and you're not attending to those things around you in a novel manner anymore, what happens is that overconfidence can become a crutch. And that crush can get kicked out from you because you always park in this spot and you always take this road. For example, we saw it just in St. Louis. Do you remember how the directions took us in Jefferson City down a certain route? And we got there, and everything said detour, and it took us away, but the road was closed.
Yeah.
Okay. And so you merely turned.
Yeah,
you turned and you made a loop like a teardrop, and you're coming back out to use a different road. Everybody else was staring at the road, staring at their phone. They were stymied. What do we do next?
That was actually the thing is, and I can kind of go to what you're saying is that we weren't from the area, so I'm obviously already more alert and looking around and paying attention to where I'm at because I have to find where I'm going. And then so we were able to sort of increase that time and distance in a sense, like, okay, we can see up and out and go, oh, wow, that was a poorly marked detour because that road is closed right there. And then as soon as we turn around, I mean, just in the 15 seconds to turn around, there was like 6 cars all jammed up. They were clearly from that area and had no idea. Yeah, they were like, what? This has never happened on the street before. No, that's a perfect example. But can you just before and I know you want to define kind of course complacency, but can you kind of explain what you because you got into the physics a little bit, but what do you mean by entropy adding to this, or everything falling to its lowest state of order? Like, are you just saying that it's not just a mental process that occurs? This is how the physical world is sort of composed of.
The entire world and everything, every manifestation of physics that we understand is that things are introduced, things run their course, and things go away. Okay. Humans, water, rain, storms, gravity. Do you get what I'm trying to say? After a while, certain things will decay, some at a very constant and consistent rate, some at a radically different rate that we never expected. And the reason is, I'm not going to get into the reason because I'm not God, Buddha, Vishnu, Allah.
Yeah, okay.
But the physical reason for that is that most things that survive for a reason. They're stronger. They're more streamlined. They're more efficient.
More adaptable.
But, more adaptable. But there's a point to adaptation. There's a point to adaptability. And once we reach that threshold, then everything's downhill. Look, you can only go out into the universe so far before you reach the end. You can only spin so many times around an axis before the axis wears out. That's just natural. That is so. Now, in some things, it takes 100 million years, so we don't notice that entropy as much.
I got you.
But when I walk into my house, I have this little fucking, pardon my language because I get pissed about it all the time. I get this little key ring that Nico made when he was a kid. It's 3 rings that are on it, right? So those keys are for my keys and Shelly's keys and the extra set of house keys. You know what's on there now? The dog collar, an extra leash, the whistle. Okay, anything that I had in my hands when I came in the door.
Same one coming into the side door of the house here.
Right. So, but look, my teacher for physics, who I absolutely revered, physics is the science of measurement, and entropy is a physical quality. It has a measurement potential. You can see the decay. But he never said, hey, when you get home, take a look at that key ring on the inside of your door. So I like to street it up. I like to make it, where anybody listening goes, oh, shit, I know what that is. And so complacency is the same way. Complacency is the thing you walk by, is the thing you accept. But we never tied those together for our listeners. Complacency is a natural line of drift. Why? Because it's the easy state. Look, there's a drawer in every house. That's the entropy drawer, which is the complacency drawer, where everything ends up, right? So the minute that you have overconfidence in your skill, like I saw 2 people getting ready to fight in Gunnison the other day, and it was the funniest thing in the world because both of them were older people, and it was over a gosh damn parking spot where you park and get stuff delivered out to you. And the one guy was shaking, and it wasn't because of the cold. The other guy was making threats, and his mouth wasn't even working, so the words weren't working. And it was like, hey, relax, old guys. There's plenty of parking over here. But the idea was that they were both complacent in their space at life. And now this nuanced arousal came in, somebody that you want to argue with, and they were unprepared for it. So complacency is unprepared for this sudden and sometimes violent entropic change that's going to hit you. So the more things that you say, it's fine. Hey, that hose got a leak. Yeah,
no,
that's fine.
that's
Right?
it. And I like how you called it the complacency drawer. Everyone has that junk
We all
drawer
do.
in their house where they just throw it in there, and then there's like some random Allen wrench from some piece of furniture you bought like 10 years ago. There's like a shitty little screwdriver in there that you don't have with your other tools because it's just like a little at home one. There's the coupons in there. There's the something that you were going to save and give. There's the extra, like I'm literally listing this out of my head of what I know if you open that door.
How about that cable, that Ethernet cable that came with the tool that you've never even unwrapped, but it's still there just in case.
Well, just in case, you know what I mean?
And in case of zombie apocalypse, right?
I might need this Allen wrench to tighten up, the insurgent's, dresser thing that I bought her 5 years ago, even though I could just go to the garage and grab my tools. No, exactly. it's this one goes to that. So
but
I want to hang on to it,
Exactly.
No, I love that. And then I just remember same thing, we had a kid growing up, and then that was also like the coupon drawer. So my mom had a basket of coupons, and then she'd every once in a while have to go back through it, throw out the ones that expired, and make sure she had whatever she needed for the store. So
I want to add one thing though, Brian. This all comes from we call it barriers to situational awareness. Because these things get in the way because of entropy. The 4-point standard of complacency, which we'll talk about, is all based on physics. You see what I'm saying? So it's science. We didn't just you're perfect where you say complacency kills. Well, not attending to the situation can get you killed.
Yeah.
And complacency can increase it can contribute. It can increase to the
lack of
the disorder, the uncertainty, right? But it's not the one that's responsible. You are for not paying attention.
Okay. So that's a good sort of 30,000 foot view in general, because you're getting to that because now we're going to get into sort of the actual mental processes that occur with it, and so we can name it, we can understand it better. And so I'd love for you to define, we define it in a very specific way, and it's within the context of a course. And like you said, it's sort of, hey, these are some barriers to situational awareness. These are things that are occurring naturally that you can't. Well, maybe you can do something about, but they're sort of working against you, and they're working against you because, like you said, not only when it comes to physics and entropy and where things are headed naturally, it's the same thing sort of biologically as a human, is you're trying to burn as few calories as possible every day. Your brain limbic system goes, dude, just sleep more, eat more, procreate the species, we need to survive. Don't do too much. Don't go over there. Don't look around that corner. Stay in here. It's work for you. You've been living in your mom's basement for 40 years. Why change? It's safe in here. We're in the nest, right?
Yep.
So in a sense, we're in the nest. We're in the circle of trust, right?
Exactly.
But so I'll throw to you then, if you could, and you kind of sort of let's jump in and define what we mean by complacency.
So I would say this: if you want to really take notes and deep dive on your own to this, draw north, south, east, and west on your yellow pad. In other words, draw up, down, left, and right. And the adaptation and change blindness are going to be the top and the bottom. Adaptation, small changes, put that on top. Change blindness, big changes, put that on the bottom of your arrow. Then on the left-hand side, put sequencing, and on the right-hand side, put channel capacity. So and it's right from the wall of the dojo back in Detroit. The reason is, and bringing it forward to Combat Hunter and ASAT and everything else, the reason is there are big changes we miss and small changes we miss. There are sequences that we should, piece of candy, pick up on that we don't. And then there's a limit to novel and nuanced information, which causes us to be overwhelmed. So if you can understand those 4 points, then you're going to be smarter, stronger, and harder to kill. So adaptation, first one, small changes, okay? The lack of one or more of your sensory organs responding to the intensity, or the quality, laser flashlight of an external stimulation. And that results in reduced responsiveness of one of those sensory receptors. And the longer, the more prolonged or repeated those stimulations are, the less we attend to them. So at first, listening to that guy with the dumpster and the beep, beep, beep on Tuesday night is keeping me awake. Okay, you go throw a piss, you are just ready to do a cup of tea, and all of a sudden you notice that you're not hearing it anymore. Well, the idea is that when it's nuanced, it is new. And those small changes we attend to because we need to know if they're survival related, food related, or I can make love to it, right? And we go deeper on that later in other episodes. But your sense organs responding to that intensity will change. They'll tune it out. So small changes over time, we tend to want to tune them out because they're not linked to our survival.
So adaptation, I always give it's like a car alarm. I mean, how many people even look anymore when there's a car alarm going off?
Exactly.
You've heard that so many times. It's sirens if you live in a busy area. That's the thing with me. It's like I can hear. I'm not far from the firehouse from where I live, and I'm up the hill a little bit, so I hear every time they go. And then there's like the where the insurgent goes to school is also right by the house, and it's like. One of those times, it could be them responding to the school, and I wouldn't even it wouldn't mean anything to me anymore. I've heard it every time they go out on a call. I hear their sirens go off, so it's like I have to force myself to go. Hang on, do I smell any smoke? Is it around here? What's going on? Because
but juxtapose that, Brian. Juxtapose that to you and I on the road, and we'd been on the road for a while, and all of a sudden we're standing and teaching, and Jefferson City, a fire alarm goes off right in the building where we're teaching. How fast were we out of there?
I pooped myself a little bit. Was out the door before I knew what was going on.
And by the way, that's cortisol, making sure that you've got the extra bandwidth for fleeing, right? But the idea was that we were both out the door, and I was holding the door for everybody to exit, and there were still people sitting in chairs going, "Oh, it happens all the time." Are we going to do this? But that doesn't matter. Yeah, it was novel, Brian. Novel, nuanced things that we don't expect in our environment. Our brain, specifically our limbic system and amygdala, are searching for those things. But once they see them and they smell them and they touch them, just like your dog kicking around on the ground or your cat in a cat box, once we're sure that it's benign, guess what we do? We exclude it.
Tune it out.
There's a danger, right? That leads to that level of complacency danger. And then the next one for big changes, remember how we're doing this. Okay. Change blindness. So change blindness is big changes. Change blindness occurs when we fail to notice the big changes in visual stimuli because it's the most important of all of our neocortex. The reason we assigned so much to our vision, our eyes are in the front of our head. We only have a limited peripheral vision. We're stimulated by the environment. So change blindness happens because of routine focus lock. Let's put it that way. And when I say routine, I mean clinically routine. In other words, you encounter situations every day, and each time that you do, you pay less attention to them. That even if it was a jack in the box, Brian, you're not going to pay that much attention. So a major change in your visual stimulus is introduced, and we don't notice it. So all of a sudden, it's that big panel truck that's there, or a new dumpster that's in the situation, or they change the paint on the entire house. And the idea is that because we're driving to work and looking at the stop sign and a kid crossing the street, we don't attend to it. And therefore, all of a sudden, somebody says, "Now that happened weeks ago," and you feel like the village idiot, right? Change blindness. So, and you made a great point. So, what's the difference between inattention blindness? Inattention blindness.
Yeah. Real quick, I did want to bring that up because there's we call it as change blindness, but a lot of folks haven't heard that term, but they have heard the term inattention blindness. Yeah. So, I just wanted to kind of address that. So, thank you.
No, and it's great that you brought that up. So inattention blindness is the failure to notice a fully visible but unexpected object because of how we attend to. Yeah. But it's different from change blindness, a big change, because you're engaged in a very specific task. So, for example, when you remember the video everybody talks about it in psychology, I look, count the number of times they pass the basketball in front of the elevator. You have this, and all of a sudden we missed a gorilla. That's what inattention blindness is. So when we're driving and somebody's asking us a question and we reach down to change the radio, and all of a sudden, shit, we missed our exit. That's different. You see what I'm trying to say? Because we're in a specific groove on the record, and therefore those stimuli that are closest to us, we just failed to notice them. And change blindness is all of a sudden we come into this environment, and we've been dealing with the environment for a while, but because our pattern is repeating and we're in that groove, we miss those stimuli.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that this great description of how those are different, and I'll put a link in the episode details to the gorilla with the basketball one. That's a great one. Or do you remember
Easy.
the one where the guy walks up? I think he's in London or somewhere, and he's got a map and he's showing it to people, and like he's asking for directions and pointing, and they're like, "Oh, you go down there," and then he has someone come by and he switches out, and then they kind of people look, and most people don't even notice, and then when they do, they're kind of like, oh, whatever, I must have not seen it correct. So it's a completely different human. The second part of the conversation, they don't even notice.
Exactly. And watch those. That's inattention blindness.
Yes.
Or also called inattentional in some or psychological circles. Now, there's another one I just want to bring your attention to that I saw. And, Nico was fascinated when he was growing up by magicians. And the magicians that get closest to you, that are doing the things right in your face, understand your functional field of view. And what they're going to do is they're going to hide in the periph by getting close to you, so they fool your functional field of view, right? And these two people are in this booth where you would have like a puppet show, and they make them stand in the booth. And the one comedian slash magician is coming up, and he's got this blanket thing. And as he's making them pay attention, like the cat to the ball of yarn, the other guy's right in line with him behind him, the other magician. And all of a sudden he throws that up and ducks down out of the way, and the other guy catches it, and now it's a different guy. And they go, holy shit, he disappeared and came back. Well, what happens is they're forced inattention blindness. You get it? And it's much like what the gorillas are. I get you so focused on this, and I prep your mind for it, and you're anticipating, oh my gosh, the math is going to be the answer. And then all of a sudden the gorilla goes by and you miss it. So that was one of the videos that they showed all the time in Early Combat Hunter when they were trying to figure out what they needed to show the Marine on the street. And the problem with it was, I said, no, that's not what they need to see. What they're missing is they're missing disturbed earth and the bomb and all those other things. And that's why we still make the differentiation between change blindness and inattention.
And that's things. Those first two, the adaptation, change blindness, those are the changes in my environment, especially if they're slow. I'm not going to notice if it's never something that's been important to me before. It'll be gone, and I won't even know that it was there in the first place. So the next two, go ahead.
Sequencing.
And you talk about channel capacity and sequencing, and so what does that? What are those?
Exactly. Now, remember, we're on the left with sequencing, on the right with channel capacity on your drawing, so you can add little things to it. And you can go back and listen to this podcast and fill in those blanks if you need to, or just buy the textbook and you got it made. So sequencing is the ability to perceive, represent, and then execute a set of actions in a particular order, a sequence. The problem with that is that once the pattern begins to repeat itself, we're less aware and more reliant on the pattern in each subsequent repetition. So we rely on the fact that there is a pattern and it does repeat, rather than attending to the new thing that's coming towards me. And the easiest way to do that is to explain that if you're searching a suspect, for example, if you're a copper, or if you're waving people into a parking lot, on the first one, you're very attentive. Okay, they've got their decal, they're holding up their ID. I can look in the vehicle and see that there's no bombs or guns or anything. And you wave the person in. Then the second, okay, those same things exist. By the third time that you do that, now you have a pattern. It's no longer happenstance. So even if the person held up a fish and the tag that was glued on there was from a box of Lucky Charms, what happens is you're less aware. The pattern starts taking over, and as long as it's close enough in the alley to the pattern, like bowling, think of that. You got a gutter on both sides, right? As long as you can keep it in the middle, you're going to hit a pin. That's sequencing. Okay. So
and then that's your brain saying like, okay, I get it. This, I know what to do. I can take over from here. You don't have to attend to this as much because I see the pattern and I'm giving you the answer before you get to the end of the sentence, before that car's even fully there. Right.
Yep. And that danger is that once the pattern starts to repeat itself, we get dumber. And so that's why it's on the left. We have to attend to it in every situation. Because remember, the star in the center, if you're catching on, is your future. And so you're going through these towards your future, or you can get on the other side of your yellow pad and look back and size up the situation and see where it went wrong. So the center is your tunnel, your time tunnel. So let's talk about channel capacity on the right side of your yellow pad now. So in engineering, channel capacity is the maximum rate at which information can be transmitted through any channel, right? But in humans, it's the maximum number of mental models that we can balance or juggle at any one time. We have a limited space in our brains, for certain kinds of novel or nuanced information because it's so important. And so our brain disregards those things. Numbers, for example, we can all remember 6 or 7 numbers, not 500 numbers. Okay. Then we start getting overwhelmed and lose track of them. That's intentional. That's so you don't make mistakes where it counts the most. And this extends to groups of things or stacks of items. And for example, in our old world, no creature on the face of the planet could go faster than 33 to 35 miles an hour. So how did we adapt to that? Okay, we got to the point where anything outside of that, we can't look at with distinction or clarity, right? So the angle of repose, anything above 33 degrees is going to degrade. See, so physics and psychology are very closely linked when it comes to these mental models. So anytime it's so serious, such a serious mental model, we have a limit, and the brain sets that limit without asking us.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
You know those books that made you fall asleep in high school English class? They can also help you grow leadership skills you can use right now. My name is Hassan Sorrells, and I am the host of the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast. On this podcast, we read selections from great literature in the West and globally, and extract lessons from those books that can help your transformation to becoming a better leader today. Because reading and understanding great literature is better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. Listen and subscribe to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast on all the major podcast players like this one, and tell all your colleagues in leadership. And thanks.
No, and that's and just to, in case anyone listening is going, well, wait a minute, I can remember more than a certain amount of numbers. It's like, yeah, through memorization and through practice over and over again, you can absolutely, but that's not what we're talking about. And I like the way you put it is I can only juggle sort of so many mental models at a time. And so what are, when it comes to channel capacity, what are those limits with channel capacity then? Like I can remember 7 numbers, but that's under normal circumstances. I can remember 7 items. I can do, there's certain multitasking, the driving manual transmission while you're changing the radio and talking on the phone and rolling the window. Like those are examples of how I do this, but I know that there's limits then in certain situations. So
the scientific limits that have been put on us at this stage in our adaptation, in this stage of our lives and our evolution, is 7 plus or minus 1 or 2. Okay, because we've changed over the last 100 years, and then 3. So you do a great description of the 3, so I don't want to take that away from you. But the 7 model is so profound that I still remember 7718029, my phone number growing up as a kid. And we didn't have a prefix on it. And then the area code didn't matter because nobody was calling from outside our area. You understand? You never had to dial it, so we didn't know it. So I only had to learn my area code when I went outside of the area. And then I said, oh, so that chunking takes over and allows me to remember that as a sequence. So 313 was the Detroit area code. That becomes a sequence. Okay, got it. Put it over here. And then the 7718029 never violated the 7 plus or minus 1. So I could remember that. But guess what? Entropy takes over. And now, because I have my phone with mom on the phone, and by the way, if she calls, we're both in trouble. But instead of remembering the number, I merely remember the sequence of mom. You see what I mean? So we lead to our complacency. We are the ones that fail ourselves.
Yeah, well, and then that's the whole thing about channel capacity, because, during those times of extreme stress or extreme boredom, that number drops to 3, which is why we have, 911, stop, drop, roll, shoot, move, communicate, run, hide, fight. All of those different are broken down into a rule of 3s for a reason, because in those chaotic situations, you're not going to be able to do more than 3 things, or you can't think about that. Like you said, I can't juggle those mental models more than 3 of them.
The mental model is what's guiding our behavior, Brian. Exactly.
And what we're talking about is literally the cognitive process of thinking, of cognition. Like you can have rote memorization, you can have what people call muscle memory. You can have a stimulus and a conditioned response to that specific stimulus, but outside of but that's very different than what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, like you said, those mental models. How do I think through a situation? What can I do? What can I think about? What can I remember? And so you just defined all of these. So we define complacency as that adaptation, change, blindness, channel capacity, and sequencing.
Right.
So you've got all, and I like it how we well, of course I like it how we do it because it's our stuff. But meaning
those students that were at the police academy like that break to do AI, Brian.
So the but what I'm getting at is it's if I can define it, I can help. Okay, now I can understand a little bit better. I can put words to it, right? It's not just, I was being complacent. And I appreciate how you brought up, before we even jumped into this, everything sort of behind it. And you brought up sort of physics again, meaning there's an absolute limit, which then feeds into our behavior, which then obviously feeds into our psychology and how we think and how we approach these. So I've got all this stuff sort of working against me in a sense. But then why then, does this even exist? Like, why do I have these different things that affect me? Like, what's
amazing question. So what I would do, why does it exist? And what I would do right now is take your yellow pad, and you've got the arrows up and down, and now the center section is the time tunnel, right? So kind of at the bottom left of your north, south, east, and west, draw a little baby stick figure. Okay. In the middle, exact middle, draw a little bit bigger stick figure, and towards the top right, almost touching the north, south, east, west ring that you've created, a little bit bigger. So do I want to understand previous, current, or future and work on my anticipation? Why is that? Because, Brian, I'll give you an example of money. I'm walking, and unless I'm conditioned to see a penny, pick it up all the rest of the day, I have good luck, whatever. Okay, I look and I go, it's a flipping penny. I walk right by. So how we're conditioned to the stimulus is how we respond in our mental model, and all people are different. Now it's $1, and almost everybody would stop and pick up that $1. But there's some people that go, it's a shitty snot-covered $1. I don't want, right? So that person, now we have concentric rings of attention based on our environment. So if I was taking a look at how that involves my personal safety, I fall into a routine that every day at the same time I first sweep, then I vacuum, then I wash my floor. Why? Because I'm a little OCD, but that's just the way I am. That's my pattern that I fall into. Now, most people will go, look, unless it's a kid's toy that I'm going to trip over and bust open my skull, it can wait. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about that complacency is built in because I only have, look, I've got unlimited memory. But for present memory recollection for survival situations, I have a very narrow bandwidth. And guess what? The reason I told you to draw those stick figures, guess who the gating mechanism to every one of those thresholds is? Me, how I respond. So I'll give you an example. You know that I added a light to the front porch because that morning that we were going to the airport, we shut off all the lights and Shelly fell. And that so impacted me. That's so scared how I do the rest of my life, Brian, that I researched, bought, and made a small solar light that I put down at the bottom. So no matter if all the power goes out, Shelly's never going to fall again, right? So those things are the complacency. Shelly had done those steps 1,000 times, 1,000,000 times. And then all of a sudden, this one day, there was something different in the environment, and it cost her. So complacency didn't kill. Okay, but complacency certainly reared its ugly head and said, guess what? I just threw something at you. How are you going to field it? And again, that's entropic. That's designed because, too many people at the trough isn't good.
And there's two major things that happen with that example. One, obviously, okay, she, like you said, she's walked down those stairs how many thousands of times, right?
Exactly.
But, there was, rather than you, so you go, oh, man, there were, meaning, this happened, the event occurred, but then there was sort of a recognition on your part, like, well, wait a minute, that's actually way more serious because, like if someone comes to rob your house or attack you, like Shelly's got that covered. You know what I mean?
Never a worry.
You know what I mean? It's like there's certain things, but then when you go, what are the actual threats that, well, it is something as simple as falling down a set of stairs and then freezing to death because you're outside and you can't get up. Like that's actually more likely. And the injury that's more likely to, but that's more likely in your context, in your situation, to occur than the armed group of home invaders. You know what I'm saying? So, but we don't always. So you had to recognize that, and then you attribute some value to that. Wait, this is this could be the bigger problem. It's not the thing that gets you. I've had that even, family members, something that are sick, and it's like, oh, they're on this medication. It's like, well, that's fine. That's under control. But the problem is that medication also thins your blood. And so if you fall down and cut yourself, you may bleed out from something that would have been completely benign before. So it's not the thing that you're battling that's going to hurt you. It's these other elements. So this is why I bring that up.
You're exactly right on. And I want to make sure that we pause for just a second and go back to what you just set up. So we said, take the yellow pad, north, south, east, west, right? Then put the little people in it. So let's use this conundrum, this situation as an example. So what was different? So Shelly and I, absolutely no moon, no light, nothing outside, had to leave earlier than normal for the airport. So it's around 4 a.m, maybe 4:30 in the morning. Okay. Had the dog with us. So no need for the house lights, no need for the porch lights or anything else, because we're going down to get into the vehicle, which is idling and running in the driveway because it's below zero outside. So now, you're listing all these contributing factors. Shelly's done the steps thousands of times, but now Shelly's carrying my bag, her bag for work, and holding onto her coffee mug while hanging, onto the railing. I'm in front of her, blocking out any available light and where the steps may be, right? And then all of a sudden she goes to pass me because she's moving much more quickly, gets to the bottom step, and guess what? There's an extra step. So we have sequencing, we have channel capacity right there, okay? Exceeded both, and the sequencing made her dumber, right? Because she repeated. Then we have adaptation and change blindness. We have the change blindness because now our visual field has changed because the light source has changed, and the light source that used to exist are absent now, so she's searching for new ones. So the truck headlights and taillights become the new thing that we're searching for, right? And guess what happens to time distance and space-time between those two objects? I now lose the sense of the ground because, hey, I'm almost at the truck. So if we were going to break down that into a perfect storm of, hey, Shell, let's not do this, we didn't. Why? Because we were complacent, Brian, because we're only going to the airport, because there's no real big significant consequences. And that's what we're talking about on today's episode. If you had the time to do a do-over, the little guy that's on your yellow pad right now, the little baby stick figure to the left, we should sit at the kitchen table and plan it out. But do we, Brian? No, because we become smug. We become conceited in the fact that we're smarter than the average bear, and these simple problems don't bother us. And guess what? That's when those simple problems come up, and God, Buddha, Vishnu, Allah flick you behind your ear.
Well, that's the thing. It's always those ones that it's easy to focus in on the big events, or the especially you're talking about from like a security perspective. You look at airports and everything that goes into the security and access control and everything, and then what just happened a couple months ago. I think it was in Utah, or maybe the guy was flying to Utah. I can't remember where. Mental health issues. He was going to see like a family member. So this guy had all kinds of problems, and his flight got delayed or canceled, and he completely freaked out, and he got access into a secure area, down under the tarmac, and crawled up into the engine of a plane that was running, and it killed him. And it was like, okay, so this guy who was just having some sort of episode was able to defeat all these security measures. Like, well, wait a minute. Like we didn't plan for this.
Hold that yellow pad up there.
We didn't look at this area. Yeah,
exactly. You and I use that yellow pad, Brian, in a very different way, and I want to make sure people understand it's not just a metaphor. And I have those drawings right now at my right side that I'm drawing along with you as you're listening. The only difference is the acetate function. I like the ability to be able to kind of look through that. So when I see the tunnel, I see into the future, and I see that future guy. So that family could have sat down and said, here's some of the likelihood. Now, that was a very, very wild unlikelihood, right? So you can't predict everything.
So, I was just talking about it, using an example of those things, how our planning process can account for one things, and those little things, something like this. But in that case, actually, the guy, I think it was his dad or his uncle, he knew something was up, because when the guy called and said my flight was canceled, he's like, oh man, he is not going to take this well. He is going to completely flip out. And he did. He didn't know it was going to rise to that. But, so we have these barriers, right? And they're there for a reason. In fact, they're sort of there. Complacency is there to keep us alive in a sense, or to not become overwhelmed. Don't worry about these things anymore. I've already categorized that as not a potential threat to your survival, so it's good. Don't pay attention to it anymore. Or keep doing this the same way over and over again, because you'll burn less calories. Cognition and thinking and is hard, and it's difficult, and it burns those calories, and your limbic system doesn't want to do that. So I've got all this sort of in a sense, we look at it as a negative thing, but biologically speaking, and for the human race, it's sort of it's one of the things that's helped keep us alive despite our
Amen.
greatest efforts sometimes. So it's there as a natural process, but then so if it's a natural process that we're all prone to, and you're saying even when it comes to physics, we're sort of heading in that direction, how can I counteract these? How do I counteract adaptation and change blindness and channel capacity and sequencing, or complacency in general? Like, what is there something I can do about it?
Of course,
that I can come up with some process to counteract this stuff.
So let's think of Harry Potter's magic wand as physics. And let's think of the psychological, physiological, or sociological imperatives of each one of those questions. And we want to tap that wand to get a response. So what we do is we invoke science to each of these problems. So I'll just go all four at once. So number one, put a mirror up wherever you work just before you go out of your office, out of your house, out of your car, and take a look at the mirror and ask yourself the question, am I ready for this challenge? Am I ready now to get out of the car and walk to work? Say those simple things to yourself. And what you'll do is you'll build a connective fiber, axons and dendrites will start to come together, and you'll repeat that behavior even autonomically, even to the point where you're not thinking about it. That's when you become complacent. But the idea is the mirror is the first step, right? Then the second step is always envision wherever you are when you start mind wandering, daydreaming, we call it. Always envision the room that you're in, the car that you're in, looking around at the intersection and see police crime scene tape. I do that all the time. Is this where it's going to happen? Is this the situation that's going to get so out of control that it's the demise of the ream? And when I do that, it immediately is like splashing cold water on my face. I tune back in. Now, the next thing, okay, check your 5 and 25s at each new threshold. So I'm coming in a door, I'm going out a door, I'm opening my car door. I want to look 5 meter, okay, close targets, everything looks fine. Then I want to look 25 meter. Hey, what's that guy with the shopping cart barreling towards me? Is he chasing it, or what's going on? And then the next thing is, okay, take a knee with me. So sometime during the day, I need to take a knee and reconcile. Hey, how am I doing at 10 a.m.? Okay, where am I at right now? I'm going to go to the water cooler next. Am I prepared if there's an encounter with Jim because we had the argument on Friday? Okay, then the next thing is school circle with my family or my immediate circle of confidants, right? And then the circle gets bigger. So whether you're a COO, whether you're a police chief, whether it's on-duty roll call, whether it's anything, Brian, if you take those deliberate, intentional steps throughout the day, and what do they take? A second? I think I gave you 5 or 6, and they're not going to take more than a minute total to do them. But guess what it does to you? It spinal tunes you, and it cognitively tunes you and gets you back in your lane. I think that's a very simple, achievable goal for everybody listening.
No, and I agree, because you bring up, and you said the two words, deliberate and intentional, and that's what I try to do with everything in my life. I don't care if it's working on a project, talking to the kids or my wife or whatever it is. It's like I want to do one thing, and I want to be deliberate about it, because I may only have when we were talking about this, it's sort of it has to do with this, but doesn't, is that, when I got to drive the Insurgent to practice or something like that. Okay, well, I've got 10 to 15 minutes alone in a car with her there and back, a couple times a week. So why don't I use that time when we're not going anywhere? We can sit there and talk and catch up about stuff. That's better than just, trying to have a conversation when there was something else going on or she's working on this. No, it's just us. And that 10 minutes gives me all the information I need about what's going on in her day, what's affecting her, what's happening at school, what we need to do, and what I need to address with my wife when I get back after I drop her off. And all it is just, it's that same thing. It's, okay, well, let's get our head in the bubble here. You're going to practice. And then maybe if she's got a competition coming up for her stuff, it's like, okay, well, here's some things to think about at practice. What about this? What about the coaches saying? What are they saying here? What are they doing this? Here's some things to think about. And so it allows her that a couple minutes to get mentally prepped into it. And you're just weaving that into everything that you do. Like you said, you do hold the mirror up before you walk out. Or am I ready for this? Is this what I want? And I do this, it's easy, of course, when we're on the road or training or something like that. That's the last thing I do is like get everything ready. And before I go out to go down to the car, it's like, they always got the full length mirror or whatever in the hotel. And it's like, okay, do I look professional? Is this good? Am I ready? And taking that second, that breath. Okay, we're going to go do this, and then boom, now we're in it, and we're going. And it was funny because I forget how much we do that stuff. And it was we had Dan Chavez from our advisory board with us on this last one, and it was actually when he was talking to him yesterday. He brought up so many comments about us going like, hey, when you guys are driving in, and when you're meeting at the car, and when you're doing like. And I go, yeah, well, we have to, he's like, you guys are so already in tune and talking about it and going through and deliberate. And you're going, I'm like, yes, because that's how it manifests itself in the classroom. We have to do it in our lives and model that behavior. And do we over exaggerate it sometimes in front of students? Of course, that's the point, to get them to see.
And it's deliberate. It's intentional. Exactly.
And so he was like, I'm seeing so much more about what goes on behind the scenes now that I didn't notice before, because I was just eating the popcorn, watching the show, when you guys are training. But I'd explained to him, I was like, but that's how you get good at this stuff, is those deliberate, intentional steps that you take. And so with everything that you have working against you cognitively, you have so much working for you as well, right? There's so much that you have, and you even brought it up. You've got all this. You said you have basically infinite amount of memory, but you can't recall all of that if you don't practice that, or if you don't make those connections to different parts of your brain or different experiences that you've had, and you don't do that automatically because you have all of these processes working against you. Look, you've made it this far in life, so clearly you're doing something right. Your brain's going, no, look, I've been on this earth for this long. Like I know what I'm doing. And so that's we fall into that sort of cognitive trap. And so the one of the big reasons I did want to talk about this today is because these are things that I can now name, and I can go back to that yellow pad that you were talking about. I go, oh, that's an example of adaptation where I didn't notice anymore. That's an example of change blindness. It's the remember I told you about the one from the TV show The Office, where Jim comes in, and every day, like, he starts filling up Dwight's phone with, like, quarters or something like that. So it gets heavier and heavier and heavier. And then, he lets it sit there. And then one day he comes in and he empties them all out before he gets there. And so what happens when the phone rings? He's used to that heavy phone. And so he picks it up and he punches himself right in the face because it's now light. It's like such a great example of that adaptation and change blindness and channel capacity and sequencing. So
do you know why we have this in addition to the yellow pad? Because for the lessons,
you're holding up
lesson, Moleskine, a little binder, an additional note-taking device, even above and beyond my computer. Why? Because you just told a great story. Now, in that margin for that topic, I add that story. Now, 70 people are going to get that story, but a few of them don't watch The Office and immediately tuned out. So then I go to my book and I get story number 3 or number 7, which is more relevant to them. So the idea about your life is these note-taking sources become how you structure your response. And I said 5 and 25. So next to the 5 and 25s, say 5 internal baseline check, 25 external baseline check. Okay, I said, look in a mirror. Brian, that's an internal baseline check, right? So these are forms of in-stride checking, okay, checks on learning, and after action reviews to make sure that I learned that lesson before I pay it forward. And I'll give you an example. In St. Louis, I wasn't running on all cylinders. I started getting sick at the end of St. Joe. And I got so sick that I thought I was going to be at urgent care or the emergency room, losing sleep, everything else. Brian and I did 2 back-to-back days there. I was really hurting bad, had to run to the Rite Aid, get a bunch of stuff to choke down. And then on the day that we did the podcast that Brian's talking about, which was with 2 legends, Mike Warren and Brian Willis, and the third legend, Brian Marin, while we were sitting in that room doing it, I was exhausted. I was dehydrated. I had popped a bunch of those pills, and you can even see it if you watch the vid. I mean, I'm a mess, and I feel bad for it.
Yeah, your head is in your hand half the time.
I'm trying to hold it together, right? But because we didn't have a time. Brian had already paid for this thing, and we just driven from teaching, and now we got to do this instead of lunch and then go back and meet other people. And so in my mind, I was with a bunch of close friends sitting on a couch in the green room waiting to go on. So there was a couple of points I said stuff that was straight from the heart. And I hurt some people's feelings. Yeah. It wasn't my intent. Yeah. But what happened, guess what? Yeah. I became complacent. Those things in my environment wore me down. Yep. And you know what I didn't look at? I didn't look at the mirror in my pocket, Brian. I didn't say, okay, here we are, we're switching on. I just took it in stride. And now I look back and, first of all, the things that I said that were scientific, I didn't botch, but the things that I said were personal, sometimes I should have kept a zip lip. But you see how that happens? And so complacency didn't kill me, but complacency led to the point where I go, wow, I wish that wouldn't have slipped out. Okay, so you can be your own worst enemy. And that's why I said use the little stick figures. It's generally you that's going to get you killed. It's generally you that's going to make those mistakes, right?
No, and that's a great example of just sort of a seemingly benign situation that could have gone catastrophically wrong. And you were falling victim to all of these things, and it led to you saying things that you probably otherwise wouldn't have said, or was that you added in your own frustration with that situation, but
Precisely.
You were only that frustrated
right.
because you're feeling like crap. You know what I mean? You had all this other stuff going on.
I should have anticipated that.
Yeah.
Look, I'm running at expert level all the time. So my little blip can turn out into a huge bubble. You see what I mean?
Because how many times do we get on something record? How many times are people asking us questions? How many times are we talking about these concepts? How many times over and over again?
Long.
So it's being intentional and deliberate. That's the things we all fall into this. And so that's such a great, personal example of then, and then you said it, I believe we're always our own worst enemy. I mean, especially if you're living here, wherever you're at and listening to this podcast, your life is good enough where you're actually your own worst enemy. There's other places in the world where you have some horrible
that guy's my worst enemy.
Yeah,
that guy right there in the green shirt, right?
Kill me is my worst enemy.
Exactly.
But we have so much more influence over our situation, our environment, than we think. Right? We can influence it, and that was the thing. Is like, and I should have been there to go, hey, let's take a breath, hold on, remember where we're at and what we're doing. There's other people outside of this, and the longer those conversations go on, the more entropy takes over.
But why did I push it too?
Complacent.
Look, you knew I was down. I knew I was down. Why did we push it? Because this is the one chance to get those two guys in the room and ask them those hard questions. So if you're looking at the little me, the mini me, and then the big me on your yellow pad, okay, my past influences my future, but look where I am in the moment. In that continuum, am I my best at that point? So what I did is I reached for that. I ran for that. I dove for that rather than looking at Brian going, hey, can we do this tomorrow? Why? Because it was so important. So those things in your life, running for that ATM, making it through that yellow light, anytime that you're pushing that envelope, your mental models are very rigid. Now, listen, they can accept new information and they learn over time, but they don't like learning in the moment. Do you get what I'm trying to say? So I literally set up the thin ice I was skating on. And that's okay now because I learned from it and I'm resilient.
So the situation can set up that thin. It can the environment can cause the thin ice before you even go stepping out on it. It's my job to look. Well, I would say the ice was already thin due to all of those factors you brought up. So maybe we should have taken a step back and gone, all right, hey, do we want to stop and take 10 minutes to eat a sandwich before we go do this? Because, or have a cup of coffee, whatever it is. And so those little things about being, and I appreciate the personal example because that was then something that we're like, wow, like that we never would have typically done that. How did this happen? And we had to debrief it and we had to go, oh, okay. And we picked it apart. We had other people pick it apart and look at every word we said too, to say to ask their opinion on that. And they went, well, here's what you said was fine, but you did it you framed it this way and they took it that way. And that's why we're in the situation we're at. And we're like, okay, yeah, got it. That's what,
and it made sense. And again, it was a scientific breakdown, not opinion-based testimony. Shelley said it the best to me. She sat down with me right across from the kitchen table and she goes, I'll give you 9 attaboys, but that 1-0 shit, we got to go back and fix that. And that was yesterday, and it was like, fuck Shelley, gosh damn it, because she sees things so absolutely clearly. And so my next question was, what would you have done? And she said, I wouldn't have gone on. And it's like, yeah, but with me that wasn't an option. So I assumed the risk, but Brian, I also assumed the responsibility. So we went back and
No,
fixed
and
that.
that's knowing yourself there in that moment too, of what your
Right.
limitations are huge, and it's difficult. It's like, we're doing getting some work done at the house and doing this little thing outside that we wanted to have done, and we're getting little stuff built in, and this person was like, oh, you can build in this, you can have a little beer tap with a little keg refrigerator there. And I was like, nah, absolutely not. And they're like, oh, is it too expensive? I was like, oh yeah, that's part of it, but I have no self-control when it comes to those things. So if I have a beer tap at my house, do you know how easy it is for me to just go, well, why don't I just go sit down and bring the computer up there and have a beer? It's like, no, let's not do that.
And we'll have the spring-loaded tap, and then it'll be tongue activated, right?
Oh no, they were like, oh no, this stuff doesn't cost that much anymore, and it's only this, and you can put it in yourself and this, and I'm like, nah, we're not gonna do that. So
right.
But no, and it's tough to do in the moment, and it's tough to do, which is why I wanted to talk about all these, because your own brain is working against you sometimes, and it's not technically working against you. It's technically you're trying to get you to survive every situation you've gone into, but it will, the effect of that, there's second and third order effects.
But who exactly? And we have to consider the effects prior to, not in stride. So we always say that the person that's most responsible for your safety is you. So this is merely an extension of that. This is, again, recognizing and analyzing current and future events to anticipate those things and say, what would I do? Well, I tell you what, I built a new mental model. I have a new file folder for it. That's called Ready, Aim, Fire, rather than I'm angry, fire, fire, fire. So guess what? You live and you learn, and that's resilience. That's the Chumbawamba. And so valuable lesson, but pay it forward. Look, we're not kidding about that yellow pad. I'm telling you right now, no matter what your job is, if you're a COO of a huge corporation, have that yellow pad in front of you with the little people on it, and circle where you are and follow with your pencil where you're going. It's going to help. It really will help you manage your day, week, month, life, and figure out where you screwed up so you can dust off the ashes and, like a phoenix, rise from those ashes. Or what do? You continue the slow burn and ruin relationships, and get angrier, and then you skip a day at the gym, and then you're sucking off of Brian's beer tap and never leaving the house, right?
You this is why we also fall victim to missing prevent indicators. The adaptation change blindness one it's great. Social media is great for that, because you can go on someone's Facebook and see how their posts have changed over the years. And you can see, holy shit, they're in a really bad place. How did I not notice this? Right. Because it happened over the course of 2 years, and it was slow, and and you see them every single day, and you take that for granted, and we miss those things. And then that's why all of a sudden you're like, oh, someone so-and-so committed suicide. And then you go on there and you're like, oh my God, all of these indicators were screaming at me, but I didn't see it because of these mental cognitive processes that affect us. And so, just naming them and understanding them a little bit is great, because then I can come, like you said, I can write down my own examples, and then in my own life, I can recognize those when I see those and go, oh, wait a minute. This might be one of those things those guys were talking about. Like this is exactly what they meant. And so that's sort of like, if I were to do homework, and I appreciate you bringing up the yellow pad and having people sketch it out, that's how I could do it. I could categorize these things and come up with my own examples. And now going forward, it's now part of my life and my mental file folders. And I can come up with my own way to counteract them in sometimes. And so, the searching one is such a great one, because it's like, how many times do we do that at some entry control point working with someone with security? It's like, hey man, just switch out with that person and go over to their spot, and they take your spot. And you're like, yeah, but we're still doing the same thing. It's like, no. That's a new location. That's like taking your brain and doing the mental etch-a-sketch and switching it up. So just switch out and then continue doing what you're doing. It's not hard to do that stuff. And
come off the glass, we pass the binos. You're spot on, Brian.
Yeah. And so there's plenty of ways to counteract those things that are going to happen. But even just the recognition that those are happening are important. That's sort of the first step, is how do I fall victim to this stuff? And then from there, you'll figure out on your own the best way to counteract that.
Totally agree.
It's more about that kind of recognition of it. But we covered a lot in here, and then you kind of got into the physics of stuff. And I think we should maybe in the future do a podcast on that, on sort of the underlying elements that influence human behavior that we're sort of not even aware of because we can't see, and the different forces that are there. And it's all just that this is where, if you really want to know human behavior, it's physics, which is math. So I mean, you could really get down into it. But if anyone's listening and you have any questions, you can always reach out to us at the Human Behavior Podcast at gmail.com. And we'd love some feedback. If you have any questions about any of this stuff we talk about, please do that and reach out. We always cover that stuff on the Patreon side. So you can go on there. There's always more. There's always episode extras. And then we have all of our other tutorials that we do and video breakdowns. So there's a lot on there, and it helps us kind of get, keep this stuff going and keep the podcast going. So we appreciate those Patreon members who are already on there, and you can check it out, I think, for like a week for free too, if you sign up. But I gotta plug that in there. Anything else you want to sort of closing remarks, Greg, on any of this?
A couple of quick parting shots from me, Brian. One, yellow pad, use it. Part two, those stick figures on your yellow pad that you drew this morning, this is about you. Circle those little stick figures. That's you. How do I respond to this? What do I anticipate is going to happen? And then the final one for this week, I admonish you, I ask you, I beg you, be James Woods. Every time you find a new or novel thing that you didn't have a file folder for before, say out loud, "Ooh, piece of candy." And the idea is that will reinforce that you found something and you're attending to it. Watch how many times you say, "Ooh, a piece of candy this week." Those things are important, and that needs to go on a yellow pad, Brian.
And that's a terrific Family Guy reference, I believe, on that one. So, so thank you.
I'm in too good of shape, Brian.
The doctor said I'm in too good of shape. You didn't go to the doctor, did you, Peter?
I can't see out of this eye.
Oh man, I can't see out of one eye. I see too good out of the other eye. But thanks everyone for tuning in. We covered a lot today, so you can go back and make your notes and reach out to us with any questions. And if you do enjoy the episode and you want someone to listen to it, share it with them. That's the best way to get this stuff out there, and we appreciate those of you who are doing that. So thank you everyone for tuning in. We appreciate you all, and don't forget that training changes behavior. That's all for today, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in. We do appreciate it. If you'd like more information or deeper dive on anything that we talked about, you can always sign up at our Patreon site or reach out to us at the Human Behavior Podcast at gmail.com.